think we're just waiting for a few more people to join us, so if you'll just hold for a couple more minutes, we'll let you know when we're getting started. Okay, it is now 2:01, so we're going to kick this off. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Skyscanner Insights New World of Travel webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Stephanie Boyle, and I look after industry relations and engagement here at Skyscanner. And I'm looking forward to being your moderator and host for the next hour. Thank you again for joining us. We're really excited to have a pretty full house representing all sections of the travel sector today. I'm sure most of you at this stage are very familiar with the world of virtual events and webinars, so I won't go over too many details, just to say that we are going to launch a couple of polls. So when those pop up on your screen, please feel free to respond and then just close out of the pop-up and go back to the presentations. It is a pretty tight schedule today, so if you do have any questions, pop them into the Q&A box and we'll attempt to get to them during the roundtable, but if we don't get a chance to, we'll follow up afterwards. We've got a pretty great lineup of speakers today, if we do say so ourselves, so we hope we're going to leave you with some valuable insights to take away afterwards. And if anything's not addressed, again, just get in touch and we'll be happy to help you. Okay, let's get started. Quick look at what we're going to be covering today. Skyscanner's Chief Commercial Officer, Stuart Middleton, is going to kick off the session for us, followed by a look at some of the biggest shift we've seen in travel search and demand, and that'll be presented by Gavin Harris, who's our Director of Strategic Partnerships at Skyscanner. Ollie Mival, who's our Director of User Research, is going to take us through some of the consumer sentiment research we've done over the last 8 months. We've also got two wonderful guest speakers, John Strickland, who's going to talk about the changing economics of aviation, and Patricia Yates, who's joining us from VisitBritain, and we'll talk about the impact of COVID-19 on tourism at the UK level. Finally, Jessica Drucker, who joins us from the Downtown Alliance in Lower Manhattan, is going to be joining us for our roundtable, where we are going to cover off some of the big issues impacting the sector at the moment. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Stuart Middleton and let him take it away.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Stephanie, and welcome everybody for joining this Skyscanner webinar. My name is Stuart. I joined Skyscanner back in 2009, and at that point, I think we'd be best described as the archetypal travel startup. So 25 staff, very small organisation, 3 office rooms, that's all. And clearly today we're very different in that we're 1,000+ organisation with a global footprint. But what I would say was true then is true now, and indeed was true back in 2003 when the company was first set up, is that we are very much built for the traveller. We're what we call a traveller first organisation. Everything we do is geared to make sure that the traveller gets exactly what they want, whether it's the level of service, the prices that they're looking for, the coverage, the quality of cabin, all that kind of stuff. We do everything that we can to make sure that we're traveller first. And in doing that, that means that our partners thrive, and I'm sure there's some partners on our call today, and they will understand that our traveller first, partner second mantra is very positive to us. And that means that when these two things happen, Skyscanner third kicks in. So when passengers make a booking, that's a good thing. This helps the partner, and ideally that should help Skyscanner as well. But it's never Skyscanner first. We're always Skyscanner last in that regard, because we do the best thing for the traveller. And in answering those questions for the traveller, it's become very difficult to really predict what those questions will be, because as it stands today, well, travel will never look the same again. We are really in very different times. For those of you on the call that can hark back to even 2008, and I know John will probably nod at this one, I worked for an airline in 2008, and at that point, the oil price was $140 a barrel. And I couldn't believe that anything could be so catastrophic as a cost like that. But then to hit, 2020 and have, it's 2008 squared times 10 times 100. It's a much harsher climate than we could ever anticipate in 2008. And that's reflected on what happens with the traveller, whether it's dealing with lockdowns, dealing with travel restrictions, dealing with the lack of global alignment, and dealing with the lack of traveller confidence in travel. So, through all this, it's we try to be traveller first. It's just more difficult to know what those answers should be when our industry's been hit so starkly. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves, how stark that drop-off has been. And it's best articulated in this specific slide. So this is what shows what was happening on air travel on January the 7th at the start of the year. And this is simply international travel, and that there were 40,000 flights per day happening at an international destinations from across the globe. And then simply fast forwarding 90 days, you get this horrific drop off where we've gone from almost 40,000 flights per day to less than 5,000. And again, for those of you that are in the airline industry, that means that there's 35,000 aircraft, more than likely parked up on tarmac. That's a very expensive asset, not being sweated, simply sitting there like a money sink. And again, that really does mean that the ecosystem, the economics of the travel world really has changed catastrophically over that period. And it clearly hits all markets. It's very much, it's not just EMEA, it's not just APAC, it's not just Americas. I mean, you have a quick glance at those international hubs and see that the drop-off that's happened across the whole piece, 87% from January through to April, it's a big shift and very much touching every corner of the globe. Now, if you look at where we are now, and this is a more up-to-date flight radar map, which shows the pulses of light or flights which are happening at that point. I suspect a lot of them are cargo as well. Let's not kid on ourselves that they're all flight aircraft, passenger aircraft. We do see pockets of demand. From a Skyscanner perspective, Brazil's picked up quite a bit recently. I mean, even in the last couple of weeks, South Korea started to move quite a lot. But nonetheless, these are small pockets of demand. It's nowhere near where it was, back on January the 7th, 2020. And these are the things that we need to be aware of and then start to try and prepare our businesses for that. I wanted to touch briefly on 5 key initiatives that Skyscanner kicked off as we went through the COVID crisis to give you an idea of how we've responded and the impact that that's had. The first thing that happened was that when it came to March 2020, we realized that every single partner on our website was going to struggle financially. The cash flows were starting to dry up. So initially we set up what we called our Partner Impact Forum. And this forum was set aside so that we could secure the future of all of our partners. Success from our perspective was that as we go through 2020 and into 2021, all the partners that were live on the 7th of January 2020, we want them to still be there a year from now, because they're the partners that have they've been part of Skyscanner's success. They're the partners that have given us the content which allows our travellers to interact with it. So it's very important that we're able to do that. And we had hundreds of requests from our partners to try and give them some latitude from an economic standpoint, and we adjusted commercial terms accordingly. So we did that. The second thing that we did is another kind of benefit of having a large marketplace like Skyscanner is when we have 100 million travellers coming into our website a month, a lot of insight can be gleaned from that. So what we did straight away was we gave all of our partners free access to our data products so that they could understand that this isn't about thriving through this process. This is about allowing them to survive. So they could look at our data and find those nuggets of gold that could allow them and their business model to ideally at least survive through this process. So we had hundreds of partners, take advantage of this free travel insights access, which was great to be able to see. The third thing that we did was we built a new advertising product, and we gave it away for free. We gave away millions of free ad impressions, specifically to destination marketing organizations. So those are organizations like VisitBritain, Visit Dubai. This specific example is Visit USA. And this is to allow any DMO across the world to make people aware what their status is. Are they open for business? Are they closed for business? Or even just simply to give people a degree of inspiration. Because when people come into Skyscanner, they're not always looking to buy there and then. And in fact, that's even less the case right now. Intent is low. But the requirement for inspiration is high. So that if we can give these high profile positions for free, allow any destination marketing organization to take that inventory to then position their place as somewhere where I might travel next. Well, that felt like a good thing to do. So we've had certainly 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s number of people that have participated in that, DMOs, to allow their destination to be showcased in this fashion. And again, all for free. The last couple of things we've done, very important again. One was about confidence ratings. So COVID-19 confidence ratings. We want people to travel. We want people to travel responsibly, and we want them to be fully informed when they travel. So whether it was the flights business, our hotels business, or our car hire business, we punctuated our website with lots of COVID-19 statements to make sure people were fully aware of what was going on. And what was really pleasing to see last week was when the travel bubble opened up between the UK and the Canary Islands, for example, travellers came in, they looked at our COVID map. So our map is one which shows in an up-to-date perspective which marketplaces, which destinations are open for business. They're able to go in, check that the Canary Islands, Tenerife, Gran Canaria, etc., were okay, get up-to-date information, and they make their decisions. And happily, many thousands did. So it was good that we were able to genuinely give travellers back give them that tool, and that they could get value from it. And the last thing that we did, we really kicked this off 2 or 3 weeks ago. This was so that we could try and understand and produce our New World of Travel report, so that we could start to ask questions of our massive traveller base. What is the psychology that's going to be required for travellers in the future, not only in the short term and the medium term, but the long term? What are the things that will be interesting to them or critical to them to make sure that they wish to travel? And therefore, can we inform and update the travel industry to take these things in mind and heed them and adapt and adjust? And a couple of kind of interesting insights which we initially gleaned. One was around, a high percentage of UK travellers are more likely to travel if the quarantine length of time is shorter, which, I guess that makes absolute sense. But we're basing this on fact now, which is something that can be diluted in this day and age, but we're keen to work on fact. And another tidbit was around, a high percentage of our travellers are prepared to actually pay for a test to potentially avoid quarantine on return. So some interesting insights there. But what I want to add is that Skyscanner is a global marketplace. We've given you 2 UK examples just for this specific presentation, but UK is only 20% of our business. 80% is elsewhere. So we can give the same level of insights, whether you're in Australia, Vietnam, South Korea, Russia, the US, the UK, Argentina. Our data sets are that robust. So lastly, just to sign off for me, what are the 3 things that I'd like to sort of to get some closure on, or certainly explore further today? One is around defining what business as unusual looks like. We knew what business as usual looks like, and it's very far from that right now. So it's key that we understand what business as unusual looks like. And in knowing that, we can start to collaborate better and experiment to have a chance at rebooting travel, ideally as quickly as possible, but also, and importantly, as responsibly as possible. And lastly, we do have this point in time to really re-architect travel as well and shape it for the future. There's there are things that we've done in the past that maybe aren't brilliant, and we should change them. This is a good chance for us to do that now. So these are some of the things that certainly I'd like you to think about. Thank you for indulging me on this, on my whimsical kind of summary of kind of where we are. I'll now hand over to Gavin. Gavin is one of our esteemed commercial directors at Skyscanner, and he's going to be talking about or updating you on the global trends of travel. So with that, I'll hand over to you now, Gavin, if that's okay. Yeah, Gavin, you're on mute.
There we go. Good start. Give me a second just to pull that slide back. There we go. Okay, I'll start again. Hi, everybody. So today I'm going to take this opportunity to share some of the travel insights that we highlighted in a recently published New World of Travel report. And it's really based on Skyscanner global search and referral data, which uniquely offers forward-looking travel demand data to some of our airline partners. Especially over this period, this difficult pandemic period, airlines and other partners have found our data critical to plug into their own COVID recovery planning and mapping and modelling in that sense. Today, however, I'm going to scratch the surface. I'm really just going to focus on 3 key trends from that recent report. Before I do that, though, just some timely reminder from Howard Hughes about the needs around innovation at this point. Okay, so from the report, the first key trend that we can pull out of that report was a significant and prolonged shift into one-way searches from return flights. So what you're looking at now is quite a busy graph, but it's essentially the share, the proportion of one-way travel searches that our users have been doing globally, indexed to pre-COVID levels on your left-hand side there. So as you can see, as you would probably expect, around the sort of March periods, there was a significant spike in travellers frantically trying to get to home on one-way flights, etc. But the interesting point is that it's actually continued throughout the rest of the year, likely as travellers have to deal with sort of volatile situations with travel restrictions as well. If I click one more, you can see the graph itself, the shadowed area indicates the global average, and you can see the markets that are actually driving this growth. It's Australia, Italy, South Korea, and Russia in that sense as well. So a huge shift to one-way travel, and it continues to be at that rate. The second trend that I can comment on is quite a significant and more recent shift to domestic travel and sustained shift to domestic travel as well. So what we can see is clearly from the graph that this is also indexed to pre-COVID levels. And you can see from the graph when I remove some of the noise as well, that it's actually driven by APAC markets. And this is clearly because some of these APAC markets have got huge domestic markets themselves, but there's significant actions taking place on the ground in these markets. For example, Korea, huge amount of marketing by travel firms, by the government around domestic travel. And also Japan, as a note, Japan government are actually financially incentivizing a lot of this domestic travel as well. And you can see that sustaining throughout the year. So the final trend that I want to highlight is travellers shifting to shorter booking windows. You can see similar to one-way flights that in 7 days, you can see there was a dramatic spike in traffic under 7 days. But you can see, unfortunately, the results of travellers really suffering from that lack of confidence and unknown when the next travel restriction is going to hit. And you can see over the past few weeks, especially globally, that under 7 day travel window, booking window, has become even more prominent across markets. That's just removing some of the noise as well. As you can see, South Korea, Russia and Germany dominating the under 7 booking window. So that's the 3 key insights from the New World of Travel document. I've also pulled together, out of interest, just some of Skyscanner's top search destinations. You can see along the top here, there's 4 key markets for us, so Brazil, Germany, Australia, and South Korea. The 2 columns that you can see are the destinations, and it's basically searches that took place 2 weeks ago versus the 2 weeks prior. And this is all for travel in Q1 2021 as well. And these, if you look closely, you can see some of these destinations, and as they change, Germany, Australia, South Korea, they tend to be highly influenced by international destinations, whereas Brazil is heavy on the domestic side as well. And I can also add in, once I click this, just to highlight some of the movement as these destinations move up and down the chart and become more popular in the green there. Okay, to finish on a positive note, we are seeing immediate impact and data and trends based on travel restrictions being dropped. And it's a clear sign that there is a huge amount of aspiration and need to travel out there. And we constantly see a quick turnaround and spike in traffic whenever these restrictions are lifted, which is great news and gives us hope, gives us all hope for the future as well. Just some of the most recent trends then. It's very well publicised, the Canary Islands being removed from the quarantine list in the UK. You can see a significant 508% week-on-week rise in searches that came off the back of that. And this isn't off a tiny base either. Like the searches between sort of UK and Spain for those routes are nearly 80% of 2019 levels as well. So it's substantial traffic. A little less so on the left here, you can see Singapore and Hong Kong, the reaction, huge percentage off a smaller base, obviously. But just another clear example of travellers desperate to travel as soon as they hear the news that Singapore and Hong Kong are creating a two-way bubble. And then lastly, there's the anticipation of Canada reducing its restrictions moving forward. Canada to India there at 57% week on week as well. So as I said, oh, sorry, go back one. So as I mentioned, Skyscanner's got this forward-looking search data, referral data that many of our airline partners are using during these trying times. And if you'd like to learn more about it, please get in touch with the team or contact partners.skyscanner.net for more information on travel insights or travel insights vision. So now I'll hand you over to Ollie.
Thanks very much, Gavin. So I'm Ollie Mival and I head up Skyscanner's user research discipline, and I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour. Oh, didn't even, it's so whistle-stop it started. Is that someone else? I'll give you a whistle-stop tour of some of the things we've learned about the psychology of travel over the past 7 or 8 months, and more specifically, what impact the coronavirus pandemic has had on it. So, as a researcher, I always start with the quote of Charles Kettering in mind, which is, "A problem well stated is a problem half solved." So to that end, back in March, as the pandemic was escalating, we formulated a set of 5 core questions to help understand travel sentiment, the needs and attitudes, and how understanding these will help inform the work of our product, marketing and brand colleagues, but also our partners and commercial operations to help recovery and growth. Oops. So these were, who are the people currently booking travel and what are their motivations? Who are the people currently considering booking travel and what are their motivations, but also reservations? Who are the people who are not currently willing to book travel and what are their reservations? But then what makes the number of people in these groups increase, decrease or fluctuate? And how does it change over time and by market? And also, what can we do to encourage the number of people in group 1 and 2 to increase? So, to answer these questions has involved a close collaboration with our data science colleagues, as well as combining qualitative travel interviews and surveys. So these have been both from our own user base, alongside recruited surveys across several of the core markets in order to give us both depth and breadth of insight. So from March, we began a cadence of speaking to 20 travelers across the world every other week. Now, across all these participants, not surprisingly, financial and health risks were top of mind. The difference in behavior, though, whether people were willing to travel or indeed even actually willing to book travel, appeared to be very clearly down to their attitude to risk. So we started to see 2 groups, different ends of the risk spectrum. For example, here we're describing perceptions of financial risk. On one hand, we have someone saying, I've already booked the Philippines for December. You know, it's cheap, although if it's cancelled, then so be it. So usually British Airways are pretty good in terms of refunding tickets, so don't really need that much risk in booking with them. Sorry, I don't really feel that much risk in booking with them. So interestingly, this person actually calls out a common strategy we've seen of a willingness to accept a certain level of financial exposure if it's not too high, plus the value of brand trust with regard to recouping a refund. But on the other hand of the spectrum, someone is saying, I'm not going to travel in the next 6 to 12 months. Job security is a risk. Unemployment around the world is rising. So if I lose my job, I'd rather not have the money locked into a trip. That's why I'm hesitant and cautious about booking anything. This fear of the wider economic consequence of the situation is, again, another trend we've seen a lot of reference to. When we move over to attitudes towards health risk, we can see again a split along a spectrum of comfort. So on one side, they said they have consulted the global experts who are saying that you're not going to get infected on the plane because the filtration system is hospital grade. So yeah, it does sit in the back of your mind for sure, but we're still going to go, we're going to give it a go. So interestingly, the messaging around air quality in planes has been so significant in influencing these sorts of opinions. And on the other side, I have no intention of planning any trips for this year because I am scared. I'm scared of getting the virus and even worse, spreading it to any family members. I will only start to consider traveling again once a vaccine is developed and it arrives in Brazil. So this sort of entrenched position of until the vaccine arrives, I will not relax, is again something we've seen often with those who will not even engage with the thought of traveling at the moment. So how widespread are these sentiments and attitudes? So to help understand this, we started our pulse survey. We kicked this off in March as an intercept survey on our mobile and desktop web platforms across 19 markets. And as of Monday just passed, there's just over 250,000 of our travelers who've completed this survey. So what are some of the things that they have been telling us? Well, there are 3 core insight areas. So on one side, we've got the perception of the global and domestic COVID-19 situation, then the level of perceived global and domestic risk, optimism, and anxiety, and then the expectation of safety horizons for global and domestic travel. So when do people think it's going to be safe to travel again? So drilling into a few graphs now, what we're looking at here is the sentiment of all the markets with respect to how they feel about the global progress of COVID-19. Do they think it's getting better, worse, or staying the same? Now, back at the end of March when we started this, the sentiment was highly negative, but the trend was towards a more positive outlook. And by the end of April, more people thought things were getting better than getting worse. However, in early June, you can see that trend reversing. That negative curve peaked around the end of July, before dipping until early September. However, it's once again on the rise in the past few weeks, even more sharply. Now, interestingly, if we map the US daily case numbers onto this graph, a pretty clear correlation of these trends can be seen with the infection rate of the US. Now, this is a correlation and not causation, but given the global media coverage of the US and its current COVID situation, it would seem highly plausible that there's a sentiment and the numbers may be related here. Turning to sentiment with respect to the situation of their own country, and the same initial drop in negative sentiment and subsequent increase in June can be seen. But here it's probably useful to look into a couple of independent countries. So in the UK, for example, we can see there's a huge spike in negative sentiment that has occurred since early September as that initial optimism around containment has started to crumble. If we look at South Korea, though, we see a similar negative spike was earlier in the year. And what perhaps is reassuring is how equally rapid has come down, and the results of this upswing in positive sentiment, as Gavin just mentioned, can be seen in the booking numbers. Now, just to reiterate, this is representative of people visiting Skyscanner currently. We did some market comparisons and we've seen similar trends, so in the wider market, but they're at an elevated level of negative sentiment, i.e. what you're seeing here is actually on the more optimistic side when compared with the wider sentiment in each of these countries. Moving on to when people expect to be able to travel safely again, the regional differences become really stark. So taking a view on global travel, EMEA and the Americas are more optimistic than APAC, where nearly 60% of people think safe global travel is more than 6 months away. The domestic situation is more optimistic, but we can see the recent negative spike in EMEA of the percentage of people thinking it is currently safe to travel in their country. So that's over on the left-hand side there. It's a trend we sadly expect to continue for a while. When we look at how 6 factors have impacted likelihood to travel abroad, they've remained actually pretty much entirely stable. So while there are changes in absolute score in different markets, the relative order stays pretty much the same across all different segments. So at the top is the uncertainty of when travel restrictions may be lifted. It's the most significantly impactful. And then it's followed by not knowing when the situation is like or will be in countries I want to travel to. So again, uncertainty. Then health risks to other people. Skyscanner users showing themselves to be an unselfish bunch there, which is nice. And then health risk to myself. Change in financial circumstances next, and the least impactful of these 6 is what my friends or families might think of me traveling. This is kind of this idea of a social risk. So As I said at the start, we want to know, how do people who are currently booking flights differ from those who are only considering and those who will not even consider booking a flight? To help with this, we ran several recruited surveys, and part of this was to assess those who are currently booking flights versus those who are considering or not considering. So what we can see here with regard to the personal impact of COVID-19 is that negative emotional levers are being felt more acutely by those who will not consider booking a flight in the next 6 months. So things like anxiety, uncertainty, fear, frustration, anger, and pessimism. And likewise, more positive emotions are more likely to be present in those who are currently or considering booking flights. So things like hope, optimism, and calm. When we look at the factors impacting likelihood to travel on these segments, for those not considering booking, health concerns are the most impactful, and considerably more so than those who are currently or considering booking. So things like the chance of contracting COVID at a destination or on a flight, as well as potentially passing an infection on to a loved one. Although to a lesser degree than the health ones, financial factors also separate these segments. So things like getting a refund, the global economic situation, or personal employment situations. Now, I've already referenced the notion of risk as a differentiator of behavior, and as part of these studies, we use 2 academic risk frameworks as a way to measure how much people's risk attitudes. So these are the sort of the psychological constructs that typically don't change much over time and allow us to benchmark a person's underlying attitude to risk. So how these impact travel behavior, and the results are really, really quite clear. On the left is the general risk aversion score. So this is, for those who are interested, Rawlman's risk orientation questionnaire. And clearly we can see the more risk averse someone is, the less likely they are to be booking flights. On the right-hand side, we have Blaise and Weber's domain-specific risk-taking scale. And what this lets us do is see a similar pattern in perceived risk benefit and risk likelihood in different scenarios. So health, financial, recreational. Those who see more benefit from, and importantly, are more likely to participate in higher risk activities in general in these different areas, are significantly more likely to be booking or considering booking flights. Oops. And I'll leave you today with one more academic framework. This is Budner's tolerance to ambiguity. So each individual has a level of ambiguity that they are personally comfortable with in any given situation. And travel is currently a highly ambiguous experience, comprising a number of factors that can contribute to that level of perceived uncertainty. We learned early on from the interviews that most travelers reported the key thing blocking them from booking travel was simply uncertainty. And by this, they meant uncertainty as to when restrictions would lift, when their governments might declare travel will be safe again, whether flights would be run or cancelled, or even if airlines would go bust. The list keeps going on. As restrictions began to ease, we saw that those with a higher tolerance for ambiguity reached their comfort threshold and began to book travel once again. So we wanted to quantify what we were seeing in these interviews. So in the external survey, we used the tolerance of ambiguity measure to allow us to see if there was a relationship between this and the likelihood to book travel at scale. And as you can see clearly from this graph, the results were, as we expected. The less tolerant a person is to ambiguity, the less likely they are to be booking travel. And we'll probably be talking about what that means for how we can provide people with comfort later on. So with that, thank you for listening, and I shall pass you back to Stephanie.
Just unmute myself there. Thank you so much for that, Ollie. It was really insightful. It's just great to see that when there is a change, that sentiment can come back up quite quickly as well, which is quite hopeful still. We're now going to post one of our first polls, I believe. So that's coming up just now. What do you think will be the most important factor in restoring that all-important traveler confidence? There's a lot of things obviously in the works right now. We've heard a lot about this in the media at the moment. I'm sure many of you will be campaigning for this in your own businesses as well. So it'd be great to get a sense from you on what you think is going to be that silver bullet that we're all hoping for. We'll end that poll and then we'll look at the results closer to the roundtable discussion. So I'm just going to end that now and we'll share those results a bit later. And now I'm going to hand over to John, who's going to give us a sense of what's going on in the economics of the aviation world. Over to you, John.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Welcome, everybody. Just checking my slides are working. They are indeed. Yeah, a few minutes to tell you quickly what is actually going on with the airlines themselves and what that means, because of course they are key enablers of travel. Airlines are having a pretty torrid time at the moment. I'm just having a technical problem, Stephanie, to move on my slides. It worked first of all. Oh, that's
I believe
back.
it should be working now.
Yeah, it seems to be working now. Just, yeah. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, airlines are having a pretty torrid time, and the immediate outlook, as we've heard from some of the previous speakers, is a great deal of uncertainty. Customers are not really willing to book, and consequently, those flights that are operating are carrying quite small numbers of people. We've got to keep in mind that essentially most long-haul travel is just not happening at all right now. There are very few people who are even allowed to travel because of border closures and quarantines, and that means most long-haul aircraft, as Stuart mentioned earlier, are currently parked. So what does that mean in terms of airlines' planned capacity? We're moving into the winter here in Europe, which is normally the low season. And if we look at a number of major airlines who are normally the market leaders, they're all talking about running a very tiny percentage of their normal capacity, anything from 25% up to about 40% here, with Lufthansa, IAG, the parent of British Airways, and Iberia, and Ryanair, which, not forgetting, is the largest and most successful low-cost airline in Europe. They also talked about having only 10% of their normal bookings for December. This is really a pretty dire situation for airlines in the coming months. I really think some airlines won't actually make it through the winter because cash is just hemorrhaging. Millions of dollars an hour are going out because even if airlines don't fly, they still have significant costs of operation. Now, moving on to the question of data, in order for airlines to have confidence to put capacity into the marketplace, they need to know they are indeed going to get customers. And they would normally have lots of historical data on which to fall back on, which would tell them what kind of levels of occupancy, what kind of price levels would be needed to achieve high occupancies on those flights. But at the moment, that is all pretty well out of the window for the reasons we've mentioned about lack of confidence. Airlines really cannot tell what customers are going to do at the moment, and those who are booking are quite often booking in the last few days, even the day before departure. It makes it very difficult for airlines to plan capacity and how to price it in a way which makes financial sense. Perhaps the only bit of information airlines are getting now, other than bookings which maybe they already hold and which themselves don't mean anything because bookings can be cancelled or have to be cancelled if quarantines come in, it's only really the mechanism of search, which of course Skyscanner is one of the means to obtain, actually looking and seeing where people would travel if capacity was offered. That's the only real clue. But as we saw, airlines are being hesitant about what capacity they will offer into the market. There's a number of other questions around operations currently, one of which is what will the future mix of traffic be? Now, we know here in Europe, again, when we had a small summer, couple of months when some flights operated to holiday destinations, we saw visiting friends and relations, VFR traffic was pretty solid. Airlines like Wizz are confident about that because people want to travel to see friends and family. People want to go on leisure trips and have done so where short-haul capacity is offered. But the big question for the future for those airlines who are flying in long-haul markets and are very involved with the premium segment is what will happen with business class and business travel. These lovely seats and this luxurious service offer, which that cabin represents, may be going begging for some time into the future. And I think this is a big challenge for some airlines' business models because their profits are underpinned by these travelers. Everybody's got used to these Zoom and Teams type conference calls. Businesses know they can cut their budgets and not travel as often. And of course, many of them want to show their environmental credentials as well. So what better to do than not fly your executives around the world? It's a big open question for many airlines on what they will do about this for the future. Another question is, what equipment are airlines going to fly? We're moving out of the era of very large wide-bodied aircraft. 747s, like the ones sadly seen in this picture here, are now sitting retired from service. These particular British Airways ones already with their engines removed, just awaiting their fate to the scrapyard, essentially. Airlines are moving down to smaller aircraft, like the picture Airbus A321. These are narrow-bodied aircraft in many cases. Some of them were designed originally for short-haul travel, but are now being adapted with technology, including more efficient engines, to do long-haul flights. It lessens the risk for airlines to offer these smaller planes. I think we will see more of that. And that in turn leads into the question of which kinds of airlines are going to survive, which business models will actually be there for the future. Well, the models we know today, we've got to talk about network and hub airlines, airlines who are offering many permutations of journeys through their hubs by offering connections. I think there's still going to be a demand for that. Many point-to-point markets from A to B are just too small to be self-sustaining to support an entire operation of an aircraft flight. They have to be part of a mix of traffic to feed through in the hub concept. But as I mentioned, we're seeing these hub airlines taking out the 747s, even taking out the younger but also large A380s in many cases. So I think the model will survive, but we're likely to see it in a reduced form and with more small aircraft operating on those hub routes. Now, the winners in previous crises have always been low-cost carriers. I think they're going to be winners again. They've proved themselves very adept at moving capacity where it's needed. They have honed their cost basis down to a minimum. We know airlines like Ryanair and Wizz have in the region of up to 2 years cash available in the bank, even if they have no customers coming through the door. That gives them enormous flexibility to jump in and take opportunities where others are falling by the wayside or cutting back right now. They also have very efficient aircraft. And as we see here on the slide, Wizz is saying they've waited 10 years for a crisis like this. They're probably the only ones who have, but they intend to seize every opportunity by opening up new bases. And we've seen a large number of those being announced in recent weeks and months. Low-cost long-haul is another story altogether. It's a very popular means of travel for the traveling public, and airlines like Norwegian and Air X have benefited from large amounts of customers, but the slide tells its own story. Here's most of Norwegian's fleet currently grounded. They've said in the last couple of weeks that they will dispose of maybe half of their 787 Dreamliners currently in the fleet. They've cancelled all their remaining orders. The question is, will they make it at all? Similarly, so for AirAsia X needing a big cash infusion. So popularity with the public is not necessarily the same as long-term financial success. Another model which up to now has been quite niche is ultra long haul. We've seen Qantas and Singapore Airlines doing very long haul flights, primarily aimed at the premium segment, premium economy and business class in particular, because you take a lot of aircraft time to do these flights. What you could do with an aircraft in 36 hours, instead of flying it non-stop from, say, Singapore to San Francisco or from London to Perth, would be perhaps 2 other trips to somewhere shorter. You really have to be sure you're going to make money out of this. And these flights have all been taken off at the present time. Singapore Airlines is going to bring back a flight to New York in the next couple of months, but interestingly enough, putting more economy seats on in the short term. But Qantas has said it sees opportunities in this segment for the future. One of the challenges of going through hubs, as I was mentioning, is all these touch points, all this queuing up, all the transfers, all the stresses and proximity to people, which now many people are more averse to. So if there is enough premium demand, airlines like Qantas could exploit this for the ultra long haul market. So a lot of things to think about there, and it's also all I have time for right now. So thanks very much, and hopefully I'll add a few more reflections on airlines when we come to the Q&A.
Thanks for that, John. As you said, lots to think about there. Definitely a lot on our minds, I'm sure, for those of us working in the aviation sector. We're going to launch our next poll, and we're going to leave it on the screen a little bit longer, as I think that some of you didn't get a chance to enter your responses to this poll. This one's really looking at innovation. So as John just discussed, there's going to need to be some changes. What innovations do we think will come out of this that are really going to transform travel as we know it? It'd be great to get a sense from all of you on what you think that innovation is going to be. What's the silver bullet again? Or certainly where's going to be the potential to evolve our sector a little bit further and see some opportunity for growth as well. And we've had the perspective from the air, and now we're going to get the perspective from the ground at the destination level. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Patricia Yates from VisitBritain to tell us a little bit about how tourism is impacted.
Thank you, and it's great to be joining you this afternoon. If I can just get onto my slides. There we are. So I work at VisitBritain, so we promote Britain internationally, and we also promote England domestically. So we have a view over both parts of tourism. Let me start with the numbers. So at the beginning of this year, we were talking about an industry worth 127 billion. An industry that employs 3.1 million people. So tourism is a really flexible job creating industry, and we've seen through previous recessions that absolutely tourism is the industry that creates jobs, and many of those jobs are in coastal towns and rural communities where if tourism doesn't work, then nobody works. We were predicting inbound tourism worth about 30 billion to the UK. We've revised that down to 6 billion. So a loss of 24 billion pounds in spend. And when we look at how we will rebuild, we're talking about spending not returning until 2026. Domestic is not much better, so a loss of about half the industry, and again a very slow rebuild to get the industry back again. We've been doing weekly consumer sentiment. This is on the domestic, to really track people's views and try and pull out who we should be marketing to. I think this crisis has been unusual, having seen a few crises myself. And normally you have a collapse in demand, and what you're trying to do as the tourist board is to stimulate demand. What we've had now is a collapse of supply and demand, with businesses closed for 3 months at the beginning of the year, losing Easter, a total lack of cash flow. So our job has been to rebuild the industry and support the industry as much as stimulating demand. Looking at the consumer sentiment and the trends, and very similar to what Skyscanner were talking about, people really nervous about booking. The one number we can see shooting up is people's judgment that whether the worst is yet to come. So more and more people think that the worst is yet to come, and not seeing real gains in confidence, actually, and this is for domestic travellers, until April 2021. Much more cautious about whether to book, and expecting to see sort of risk-free bookings, so cancellations and incentives. And we've seen a change over recent weeks. It used to be that catching COVID was the big barrier to travel. What we've seen now is restrictions on travel from government has started to be the major thing that's concerning people. If you look at the restrictions that are now in Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland, and indeed in England, both the actual restrictions and the uncertainty, what that means for travel, I think is really spooking people, actually. What we've seen over the summer is probably a slightly different domestic audience. So you could regard that as a real opportunity. Normally, you would think about your domestic audience as being sort of older and families. But of course, who are the risk takers? The risk takers tend to be the younger audience. So what we've seen is an uplift in younger people traveling who are looking for slightly different products and more adventure, more getting involved and under the skin. Some of the traditional resorts have noticed that real mix of travellers change. People tend to be looking for slightly different things. So self-catering probably had a boom summer. Seaside and rural rather than cities. And I'm sure you've all heard the worries about the city centres, Manchester and Birmingham and London at the moment, that people don't feel confident in travelling them. They've got no business travellers, they've got no events going on, and a real nervousness about using public transport. And one of the big barriers we find about travel is actually using public transport. So people reverting in a very unsustainable way to using their cars. And for inbound visitors to Britain, that's quite disastrous, because most international visitors that come to Britain do use public transport, because apparently we drive on the wrong side of the road. If you look at international travel, I would say some optimism. I'm going to talk about green shoots there, that you can see there are people who are looking to travel next year. So this is international travellers. Sorry, the domestic survey is gen population. We upweighted the survey to be that. For international, we're looking at international travellers. 35% of people think they're looking to travel next year. Now there are shifts in there, perhaps going on a shorter trip, perhaps not, perhaps going on a longer trip, because people are being more prepared to spend money that they haven't spent this year. What are the barriers to travel here? Well, Quarantine is the big barrier, isn't it? People can't get in and they can't get back into their own country, which makes international promotion pretty difficult. We're doing a lot of work on consumer sentiment, so on social media, keeping that interest in travelling to Britain, and also with working with travel trade. So travel trade are ready to sell us when we can go. I think, again, another green shoot is the government last week and this week, in fact this afternoon, are running roundtables about how they kickstart international travel, and are talking to the travel trade, to airlines, to airports, about what they do in country, what they can do on planes, and what they do when people get to Britain. And the ambition is to get a report to the Prime Minister by early November, which by my calculation is next week. So there is an ambition for government to look at international travel and how we might start to kickstart this. What are we doing? I mean, we've been looking at that consumer sentiment data. At the very beginning of this, many regions and industry sectors came to us and said, we need to work on the uncertainty that people have, and we would like a sort of mark that shows that businesses have understood COVID regulations and are implementing them. And we would like you to do it because we want it to be national and not local and not by industry sector. So we in Scotland and Wales have worked together on the We're Good to Go system. It's free to businesses, and we've got about 40,000 businesses in England who have registered on that. And then looking at our campaigns, we've had a know before you go section so that people can understand where they can travel. We have had TV advertising. I don't know if you recognise Fred there from First Dates. So we've had TV advertising that has gone across Bake Off. We've been promoting accessible travel as well, and we've put our assets out and said to industry, you just use them. And I've seen a great social media from Fuller's Pubs, who have used the Escape the Everyday for their fish and trips campaign. And in fact, I'm going to stay at a hotel at the weekend, and I noticed that they're using the Escape the Everyday. So it's really good to see those assets being used by the media. And then in another positive, I'm being relentlessly positive here. I think I've seen the industry work together in a way that the industry haven't, and really understand that government finds tourism really tricky. So many sectors, if you get 10 people in a room, you've got 12 different views. And government likes it simple. It likes clear messages that everyone supports, that government understands what would make the difference to the industry. And we had a precursor to this in that government said that it was interested in the industries of the future. It was thinking about things like green energy and automotives. And if industries could come up with a pitch to government, they would do a deal. Deals never mean money in government terms, but it did mean government commitments, long-term government commitments. And tourism came together and came up with a deal for government. And we were the 10th industry to get a deal in a very competitive process. There were around 60 industries who wanted to get a deal. Those ideas, I think many of them still hold. So that's why I think, there's consensus from the industry about what would make a difference. And some of the ideas have already been thought through and shouldn't be forgotten. So a tourism data hub, this was getting the great data like you've seen from Skyscanner, overlaying it, interpreting it for people, understanding our customers better and understanding them much more in real time and in predictive mode. Looking at people, I said tourism is a people industry. So how do you get great people in? How do you make it more than the job that you do between school and university, and really encourage people and their parents to see jobs in tourism as real jobs with potential? Infrastructure, we talk about connectivity. Now that means, in Britain, it means making sure public transport ties up, so real physical connectivity as well as digital connectivity as well. Looking at how for places, how you extend the season, so Part of that is business events, which tend to happen in shoulder periods, and then really focus down on places and what would make a difference to a place, and picking up some of those areas that would drive productivity and increase the resilience of the industry as we rebuild. I'm going to finish there. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, and thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you. I just needed to unmute myself. Thank you very much, Patricia, for that. It's been an amazing amount of presentations, really great insights from everybody. I want to thank everybody who's joined us today for the presentations. Now we're going to kick off what I think is the most fun section, which is the roundtable, where you get to hear those 12 opinions for every 10 people, like you said, Patricia. I think that is usually very true in the travel industry. So the first person that I'm going to come to for that is Jessica, who joins us from the Downtown Alliance in New York. Thank you for representing the other side of the world for us today. I know New York has been pretty seriously impacted. In fact, some people have called it decimated by the drop in international tourism. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you think it's going to take to give travelers the confidence to come back?
Yeah, for sure. And you know what, a few months ago, first of all, hi, thank you so much for having me, I should say. It's nice to join the roundtable. Excellent presentations. And I would say that the word decimated definitely would have been something that we would have said several months ago, maybe April, May, but actually really interestingly, so I'll get to the tourism numbers in a minute, but Bloomberg just put out an article today that younger people from across the US are now choosing New York at higher and higher rates, according to cell phone data, to relocate to, which I find to be extremely interesting. As Patricia was saying, obviously it's the younger trailblazers, but where New Yorkers go, so go the tourists. That's what we say in New York. And so the fact that there is relocation actually happening is seeming quite positive all around. Barring a vaccine, obviously, or some kind of very dependable treatment, those would be the biggest factors to restoring peace of mind for travelers. But I also just think that transparency in marketing is very important. I think brand loyalty will be very important for everyone. You're more likely to stay somewhere where you can trust that they're following protocols. But for destinations, no matter whether those are national destinations or in my case, a 1 square mile of Lower Manhattan, being super transparent about, not just doing promotional marketing, but how clean and safe it is, what the protocols are that all of your tourism and hospitality stakeholders are participating in. Some of our smaller museums, smaller restaurants, they don't have the megaphone to talk about what they're doing. So it's sort of up to us to be sharing that information. So I think that's really important, is just keeping in mind consumer control. So consumers want to feel control over their own environment, and keeping that focus in mind, I think, will be really important moving forward.
Absolutely. I think you're totally right. I think that it'd be good actually to see if we can now. I will hope that our worker bees are working very hard, but can we see the results of that poll around traveler confidence, just to see what the consensus was in terms of what's going to be the criteria? Well, there you go. As you said, Jessica, I think a vaccine is really what we're all looking for and hoping for. Even if not everybody takes it, it would certainly mean that people feel a little bit more relief in traveling. But it looks like there's quite a lot of interest around airport testing and global alignment, which is obviously going to be really key. Ollie, do you have any sense, having looked at your tolerance of ambiguity, does this kind of map to what you think will be the key to restoring that confidence?
Yeah, I think exactly right. So we have to allow people to meet their threshold of comfort. I actually answered one of the questions in the channel around whether risk changes and how do you make someone take risks that they won't otherwise do. And that's not what happens. You have to allow them to reframe the risk into an acceptable decision point. And so that threshold is different for everyone, right? So my health risk is different from everyone else's health risk. It's a perceived thing as well as an actual thing. So the challenge that occurred when government restrictions was first relaxed is that people had to do their own risk assessment. And that's really anxiety inducing. We actually saw spikes in anxiety when countries came back online, really. So what you've got to do is understand how can you communicate to travelers clear and consistent and transparently. And so again, Jessica used that word transparent. I think that's really important, but as is consistency. So that notion of messaging, it should not be underestimated. And that's partially how you get into that sense of consumer control. And restoring trust and confidence comes from that, and it's essential, but as is doing so in a way that reduces uncertainty and ambiguity for travelers. We found that ourselves when it's not just a case of giving more information. In fact, that increases the decision points. It means there's more things to go. Do I trust that? Do I not trust that? So trusted information sources is a critical one as well. We saw very early on that everyone was basically going who, as in the who, or government. Those are the sort of the trusted sources. And now governments as trusted sources, you can see that that has waned. So where are people looking to for their next sort of trusted sources? This notion of reducing ambiguity as well, I'll give you an example of what I mean. So Stuart, at the very top of the talk, he mentioned a couple of recent insights from some surveys that we ran a couple of weeks back around quarantine times and reducing them through testing. And also in that survey, we referenced the UK travel corridor system, right? 1 in 4 people who answered that survey on Skyscanner, right? A couple of thousand people, they don't know what the travel corridor system is. So, you know, when it's confusing and it's volatile as it is currently, clarity and consistency messaging is just super critical. Incidentally, in that survey, sort of related, there's nearly half of the people asked will be more confident to book travel abroad if they could be tested. So if the capacity for testing was there. And 7 out of 10 would be willing to pay for a test to prevent quarantine on return. And actually the values that people are doing are pretty close to what people are talking about in the market at the moment. So more expensive than perhaps people would otherwise have expected. Sort of 50 to 75 pounds is not something that's off-putting to people.
Yeah. I mean, it's clear things are going to change. There's definitely an evolution in our industry, no question about it. And on that topic, on the topic of innovation, I wanted to come back to you again, Jessica, and just in the 2 minutes we have left here, we've seen destinations need to reinvent themselves in the past. Obviously, New York, more so than others with 9/11 having impacted it. But what do you think are going to be the critical areas of innovation at the destination level post this era?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I obviously don't have any definite answers for it, but I can say that, you bring up 9/11 and, we're very careful downtown not to completely align the two things that are happening right now, but we do take lessons from 9/11. And one thing that I know that has been really interesting is that, so as a result of 9/11, no one who I work with currently in the tourism and hospitality sector downtown was working downtown in 2001, but there's a muscle memory downtown that we sort of all understand the importance of collaboration, rising tides lifting all boats. That has been a part of our connection with all of our stakeholders downtown, especially after the financial crisis in 2010. We started these tourism roundtables, and every month we bring all of our stakeholders together. And there's always been a lot of transparency in these roundtables. People share and collaborate in a way that we all know that doesn't happen outside of our neighborhood. We're very proud of that. But I do think that as a result of this crisis, the level of transparency that we are all giving to each other, sort of privately on working group calls, has been unprecedented. Sharing very specific numbers that are never shared, very specific information, because it really benefits everyone as we try and recover through this crisis. So one part, I know it's not this external facing innovation, but collaboration amongst partners and not seeing this as a zero-sum game. I think moving forward for the foreseeable future, Patricia mentioned 2026 being the recovery year, hopefully that we reach back up to our numbers. But like even beyond that, I do think that collaboration is super important. And that's sort of at the more internal level. And then I would say that what's really important moving forward for our smaller restaurants, shops, museums, is a lot of those organizations don't have what it takes to invest millions of dollars into one area of their business. So I was saying before about museums investing millions into touch screens and interactive exhibits, which now of course are sitting underneath protective cloth and not being used, or being used like on private tours or whatever. So it's about diversification and not putting all your eggs in one basket, which can be very, very hard for grant funded or donation-funded organizations, especially our cultural. But being nimble and being able to adapt is going to be so important for all levels of business moving forward. So really looking at how you can pivot or adapt, just like we're asking our tourists to do in the same way. People who want to travel are traveling differently. Our businesses need to look at diversifying income streams, seeing if the virtual experience works, virtual tours are working, if there's product lines that can be more heavily invested in. But really, I think we see moving forward the need to diversify and not depend solely on actual ticket sales or hotel sales.
Absolutely. And as we are at the end of time, I'm going to ask a quick fire round, John, Patricia, and Ollie, on the topic of industry collaboration. Where have you seen it, and where are you most excited for it to continue? Or the area you're most proud, and where would you like it to see it continue? John, coming to you. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you for spotting that. Yeah, I think all airlines are trying to collaborate, and just as we were hearing there, I mean, it's not the normal habit for airlines to collaborate, but they're all trying to sing from the same hymn sheet and working with industry bodies such as the IATA, the airline trade body, alongside airports, safety agencies. I think the missing link we have is governments. Governments is a big challenge. They're not really collaborating with aviation or travel more broadly at the moment. They seem to be missing the value, not only in direct employment, but as a key enabler of tourism, of business travel, of people visiting their friends and family. There's got to be more work on that if we're going to get through this, and listening more, willing to action suggestions that the industry is making, such as pre-departure testing, for example, which at the moment governments are not really showing much inclination to do.
And Patricia, area you're most proud of? What do you want to see continue?
Well, I'm most proud of the tourism sector deal, because getting the industry to coalesce about what are the real issues and what could be done by industry and what needs to be done by government. So I think setting that pattern, and yes, I mean, I've seen some great examples at the moment, and we're running weekly industry sessions with government involved on what are the issues, how can these be addressed, how can the guidance be tidied up. So I think that ability to access the issues quickly and get a voice into government and be able to address those, I think has been really helpful, and I think people have understood the value of that and have coming collectively as much easier than each individual company trying to wade through the civil servants.
Absolutely. I think we're going to have to end it here on that spirit of collaboration, which is definitely one that I hope will lift up this industry, which has been hurt definitely over the last 8 months. And we certainly hope that it's going to get better. But anybody who is interested in finding out more about some of the things that were presented today, as I said before, please do get in touch. And anyone who missed a few pieces, we are going to be sharing the results of the polls and the recording of this entire webinar in its entirety following today. So we'll make sure that we get that out to you. Thank you again to all of our wonderful speakers and panelists. I really appreciate your time. I think it was really insightful and wonderful, and I hope that we will see each other in person very, very soon at a conference where we'll be able to celebrate and potentially even drink a pint together. So again, thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.